A jury on a quiet Wednesday morning in Illinois delivered a verdict that would echo far beyond the walls of the Sangamon County Courthouse. After 7 tense days of testimony, tears, and body cam footage too painful to watch twice, 31-year-old Sheriff's Deputy Sean Grayson was found guilty, but not of first-degree murder. The jury convicted him instead of second-degree murder, a lesser charge. At that moment, the courtroom froze. No one cheered. No one gasped. Sonya Massey's mother, who had sat through every second of the trial, simply lowered her head and whispered her daughter's name. Because this wasn't just another case. This was the death of Sonya Massey, a 36-year-old black woman who had called 911, not to threaten anyone, not to fight, but to ask for help. She had been afraid. There was a prowler outside, she said, and when the deputies came, she thought safety had arrived. Instead, she was dead within minutes. It was July 6, 2024, in Springfield, Illinois, a humid summer night that smelled of rain and hot pavement. At 3:03 a.m., a call came into the Sangamon County Sheriff's dispatch line. The voice on the other end was nervous, trembling slightly. "This is Sonya," she said. "There's someone outside my house. I think they're trying to break in." The dispatcher reassured her that officers were on their way. Sonya thanked her. She was home alone that night, a small, tidy house just outside the city. Her neighbors described her as kind, quiet, and deeply religious. She had struggled with anxiety and mental health issues, but she'd been doing better recently. Her faith had been her anchor. Her Bible sat open by her bedside every night. When she called 911, she thought she was doing the right thing, what anyone would do if they were scared. Within minutes, 2 Sangamon County deputies pulled up outside, Sean Grayson and Dawson Farley. Grayson had joined the department not long before. He had a short temper, but a solid record on paper. Farley was quieter, more careful, the kind of deputy who preferred to listen before acting. As they approached the door, their body cameras were rolling. What happened next would later become the heart of the trial, the moment that decided whether Sonya Massey lived or died. Inside her kitchen, Sonya had a pot of water boiling on the stove. She'd told her friends before that sometimes when she was anxious, she'd make tea to calm herself down. The footage starts calmly. The deputies knock. Sonya opens the door slightly, still nervous. Grayson steps in first. His voice is steady, but firm, that trained authority tone that says I'm in control. They ask her about the prowler. She points toward the back of the house, explaining she heard something by the window. Grayson glances around, flashlight moving across the counters. That's when he sees it, a pot of steaming water sitting on the stove. He tells her to move it. She nods, and as she picks it up, Grayson backs away a few steps. "You're not gonna scold me with that, right?" he jokes. There's nervous laughter, the kind people make when they're trying to keep things light. Then Sonya says something that would later be repeated over and over again in court. She looks at him and says, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus." It's a phrase she said often, her way of warding off fear, of reclaiming peace. But in that moment, something shifted in Grayson's face. He stiffens. His hand moves toward his gun. He later told investigators that her words, "I rebuke you," felt like a threat. That he thought she was about to throw the boiling water at him. Within seconds, chaos erupts. Both deputies yell, "Put it down! Put it down!" Sonya, startled, jerks back. The pot wobbles in her hands but doesn't spill. And then, 3 gunshots. Each one louder than the last. One hits her just below the eye. She collapses instantly. Her final words, "Please, God," fade out in the background of the body cam footage. When the shots stopped, there was silence. Grayson lowers his gun, breathing hard. Farley looks at him, stunned. He hadn't fired a shot. He later said he didn't see a threat, that Sonya never raised the pot, never moved toward them. But Grayson, at that moment, seemed convinced he was in danger. He mutters, almost to himself, "She's done. You can go get it, but that's a headshot. There's nothing you can do, man." Then, for a second, something human flickers through. He grabs his medical kit, starts to move toward her. Farley's already kneeling by her side, pressing dish towels to the wound. Grayson hesitates. Farley tells him, "It's no use." Grayson drops the kit on the floor and says coldly, "I'm not even gonna waste my med stuff then." The footage ends there. Within hours, the Illinois State Police launched an investigation. And Springfield, a city used to quiet nights and slow news days, woke up to a headline that changed everything. Deputy shoots woman who called 911 for help. The initial report was vague. Officials said there was an officer-involved shooting during a disturbance. But when the body cam footage was reviewed, it told a different story. The footage showed a woman who was calm, frightened, and compliant. It showed a deputy whose fear turned into fatal action. When Grayson was questioned, he repeated the same story. He believed Sonya was going to throw boiling water at him. He said her words felt menacing. He insisted that officers are trained to react to any perceived threat. But prosecutors pointed out something crucial. He had a taser. He had pepper spray. He had other options. He didn't use any of them. Instead, he fired 3 bullets at a woman standing in her own kitchen, holding a pot of water. And she had called him for help. Within days, Springfield was filled with protests. People held signs that read, "Say her name, Sonya Massey." They gathered outside the sheriff's department, chanting her name, demanding answers. National civil rights attorneys Ben Crump and Antonio Romanucci joined the case, representing Sonya's family. Crump called it a killing born out of fear and bias. For many, the story sounded heartbreakingly familiar. Another black woman killed in her home, another officer claiming fear as justification. It was impossible not to think of Tashiana Jefferson, Breonna Taylor, and others whose deaths had sparked national outrage. But this time, something was different. The footage was clear. The timeline undeniable. And this time, Illinois lawmakers were watching closely. Grayson was charged with first-degree murder, a charge that carried a possible sentence of 45 years to life. But his defense team quickly moved to introduce an alternative, second-degree murder, arguing that while Grayson's actions caused a death, he genuinely, though unreasonably, believed he was defending himself. The trial began 7 months later. Every day, Sonya's family sat in the front row. Her mother wore a pin with Sonya's picture. When the body cam footage played, the courtroom was silent except for quiet sobs. Jurors leaned forward, visibly tense. You could feel the weight of that moment, Sonya's last words echoing across the room. "Please, God." The prosecution painted Grayson as reckless, impulsive, and unfit to wear a badge. They showed evidence of his training, proof he had been taught de-escalation tactics, proof he knew how to read a situation. Yet when faced with a frightened woman holding a pot, he reached for his gun. The defense countered that Grayson was human, that his reaction was rooted in instinct, not malice. They brought up the term serious provocation, arguing that the hot water could cause severe injury and that Grayson reacted in a split second of fear. It was the same argument seen in dozens of police shooting cases, the idea that perceived danger is enough to justify deadly force. But this time, there was that haunting footage. It didn't show an attack. It showed confusion. It showed panic. It showed a woman who wanted to live. In a bold move, Grayson's defense team called him as their first witness. He took the stand wearing a dark suit, eyes downcast, hands folded tightly in front of him. His voice was calm. He spoke softly, explaining how he saw the pot of water, how he noticed the bottom was red, and how he believed it was boiling enough to cause third-degree burns. He said, "I thought she was going to throw it at me. When she said, 'I rebuke you in the name of Jesus,' it felt like a threat." He insisted he feared for his life. But the prosecutor, pacing slowly, asked one question that hung in the air like a blade. "Did she move toward you?" Grayson paused. "No," he said. "Not physically." The courtroom went still. That moment, that one word, shifted everything. Because fear, no matter how real it feels, isn't enough when the facts show there was no imminent threat. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated for hours. When they returned, everyone stood. The clerk read the verdict slowly, guilty of second-degree murder. Sonya's mother wept quietly. Grayson's wife covered her face, sobbing. The courtroom stayed silent. No celebration, no outrage, just exhaustion. Because nothing could bring Sonya back. Outside the courthouse, Ben Crump and Antonio Romanucci addressed the cameras. "While we believe Grayson's actions deserved a first-degree conviction," Crump said, "today's verdict is still a measure of justice for Sonya Massey." The sentence would come later, up to 20 years in prison, or possibly probation. That's the strange thing about second-degree murder in Illinois. It recognizes wrongdoing, but also humanity, the idea that someone can be dangerously wrong without meaning to be evil. It's a legal gray area, and it left the community divided. Some said it wasn't enough. Others said it was more accountability than most cases ever see. The verdict didn't end the story. It sparked an FBI review and a Department of Justice inquiry into the Sangamon County Sheriff's Department. That review found what many already suspected: serious gaps in training, particularly in handling mental health calls. The department agreed to implement new measures: a dedicated de-escalation program, a mental health response team, and mandatory transparency checks for new recruits' backgrounds. The sheriff who hired Grayson retired early, citing personal reasons. But insiders said the pressure had simply become too much. And Sonya's family, though still grieving, filed a civil lawsuit against the county. It was settled for $10 million. Money that couldn't replace her life, but at least acknowledged its value. Months after the verdict, a small memorial still stood outside Sonya's house. Candles, flowers, handwritten notes. One read, "You called for help. You deserved to live." Her story changed Illinois law. Legislators passed a bill requiring full disclosure of an officer's disciplinary history, complaints, and training background before hiring. The goal was simple: no more surprises, no more hidden red flags. It's tragic how often change only comes after death. But Sonya's name became part of that change. Her story now sits in police training rooms across the state, shown to new recruits as an example of how fear can distort judgment, and how a single moment can define a life. It's hard not to wonder what went through Sonya's mind in those final seconds. She had called for help, probably relieved to hear sirens outside. She probably thought, "It's okay now. They're here." Maybe she was trying to calm herself when she said those words, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus." Words meant to protect her, not provoke. But to Grayson, they meant something entirely different. That's the tragedy of perception. Two people in the same room, seeing the same thing, but understanding it in opposite ways. He saw a threat. She saw salvation. And between those two views, a bullet left the barrel. When the sentencing date was announced, January 29th, people started to prepare for another long day in court. Some wanted him to serve time. Others argued probation was enough. But whatever the judge decides, the scars are permanent. Grayson lost his badge, his freedom, and his future. Sonya lost her life. Her family lost everything else. And a community lost a bit more faith in the system that's supposed to protect them. Sonya's killing reignited national debate about fear and policing. How much fear is justified? At what point does fear stop being a defense and start being an excuse? It's not an easy question. Police officers face real dangers. They walk into chaos every day, never sure who's behind the door. But when that fear becomes the default, when every raised hand, every sudden word, every movement is seen as a threat, tragedies like this happen. And too often, they happen to Black Americans in their own homes. That pattern is impossible to ignore. Every new name, every headline, chips away at trust. And trust, once gone, is almost impossible to rebuild. Today, if you drive past Sonya's street in Springfield, you'll see a modest white house with drawn curtains. The porch light still works. The grass is still trimmed. It looks like any other house, except for the small wooden cross planted by the front step. It says, "Faith over fear." Maybe that's what Sonya believed in, even in her last moments. Maybe, for her, faith was stronger than the fear that filled that kitchen. And maybe that's what we should all take from her story, not just the tragedy, but the lesson. Because justice, even partial justice, means little if it doesn't change what happens next time. The verdict was in, but justice, real justice, still felt unfinished. In the days after the conviction, Springfield felt suspended between relief and exhaustion. Some called it closure. Others said it was just another beginning. Because while Sean Grayson now faced sentencing, the bigger question remained, why did it happen at all? When the jurors walked out of the courthouse that day, cameras swarmed them. Most didn't speak. They looked pale, tired, drained by the weight of the decision. Reporters tried to ask, why second degree, not first? One juror paused long enough to answer quietly, we followed the evidence. But no verdict brings her back. Inside the courthouse, Sonya's family stayed seated long after the room had cleared. Her mother, Sonya Massey, held her daughter's picture in her hands, the same one that had been pinned to her blouse for 7 straight days. She just wanted help, she whispered. That's all. Outside, supporters held candles. They prayed, sang, and cried. One sign said, faith over fear, justice for Sonya. But not everyone was satisfied. For many, second-degree murder wasn't enough. 20 years felt small compared to a life lost. Online, social media exploded. Hashtags filled timelines. Hashtag justice for Sonya. Hashtag say her name. Hashtag end police impunity. Celebrities reposted her story. Civil rights groups demanded new federal oversight. And Illinois legislators promised more reforms, this time, they said, with teeth. Sean Grayson stayed mostly silent after the verdict. He was taken into custody briefly, then released pending sentencing under strict supervision. No interviews, no public statements. But a few people who knew him spoke to local media. A former co-worker described him as edgy, paranoid, and always quick to assume the worst. Another said he often talked about how dangerous his job was, how you can't trust anyone anymore. It was fear. Fear turned habitual. And fear, mixed with authority and a firearm, had proven deadly. At the Sangamon County Sheriff's Office, the mood was grim. Deputies whispered in hallways, careful about who might overhear. Some defended Grayson, calling it a split-second tragedy. Others privately admitted the video was indefensible. The sheriff, already under immense pressure, announced his early retirement within a week. In his resignation statement, he didn't mention Sonya by name. He simply said, law enforcement is changing, and maybe I'm not the man to lead it anymore. It was a quiet way to say what everyone already knew. The department had failed. January 29, 2025. 7 months since the night Sonya died. The courtroom was packed again. Reporters filled the aisles. Protesters stood outside with signs. National cameras returned. Inside, the air was heavy, that familiar silence before a final judgment. When Grayson entered, he looked different. Thinner, pale, eyes sunken from months of waiting. He didn't wear his uniform, just a dark suit and a tie that didn't quite match. Sonya's family sat in the front row, clutching tissues. Before the judge spoke, the court allowed victim impact statements. Sonya's mother stood. Her hands trembled as she read from a folded sheet of paper. My daughter called for help, and you were the help. She trusted you. She said, please God, and you gave her bullets. I hope you think about that every night. Because I do. There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Then it was Grayson's turn. He didn't look up when he spoke. His voice cracked. I wish I could take it back, he said. I didn't mean to kill her. I was scared. I made a mistake. I'll carry that forever. For a moment, you almost felt the weight of his remorse. But remorse doesn't resurrect. And fear doesn't excuse everything. The judge listened quietly. Then, after a long pause, delivered the sentence. 13 years in prison. Gasps filled the courtroom. It wasn't the maximum, but it wasn't probation either. It was a message that accountability mattered, even if imperfectly. Outside, the reaction was mixed. Some supporters of Sonya's family wept with relief. Others shouted that it wasn't enough. Civil rights attorney Ben Crump addressed the crowd. This verdict, this sentence, it's not full justice. But it's more than we often get. And it sends a message that fear is not a defense for killing the innocent. His co-counsel, Antonio Romanucci, added, "This case should be required viewing for every law enforcement trainee in America." And indeed, that's exactly what happened. Within months, the Illinois Police Training Institute added the Massey case study to its ethics curriculum. It focused on de-escalation, mental health response, and racial bias awareness. The footage, still painful to watch, became a teaching tool. A tragic one. After the sentencing, the U.S. Justice Department concluded its separate inquiry into Sangamon County's practices. Their findings were blunt. Inadequate screening of recruits. Poor supervision during field operations. Insufficient crisis intervention training. They issued a consent decree mandating reform. For the first time, the county had to publish annual use of force reports, accessible to the public. Transparency, the one thing the system had resisted for years, was now required by law. While Grayson awaited transfer to state prison, another process was underway, the civil lawsuit. Filed by Sonya's family, it alleged wrongful death and negligent hiring. After months of negotiation, the county agreed to settle for $10 million, one of the largest payouts in Illinois history for a police shooting. The family said the money meant little. What mattered was acknowledgement. In an emotional press conference, Sonya's cousin said, "She wasn't famous. She wasn't powerful. But she mattered. And this proves her life had value." Springfield began to change. New programs were introduced. A mental health first response team, pairing officers with clinicians. A citizen review board, giving residents oversight on police conduct. And a new transparency law, requiring agencies to disclose misconduct records of all officers before hiring. They called it the Massey Rule. It passed quietly, bipartisan, almost unanimous. And though the name Massey would forever carry pain, it also carried progress. While institutions moved forward, Sonya's family still lived with the emptiness. Her house was sold. The church pew she once sat in was left unoccupied, her Bible still marked at Psalms 23. Her mother refused to move away. "She's still here," she said softly in an interview. "In this house, in the air." Every July 6th, the family gathers at her grave. They sing hymns, light candles, and pray. One of the children always reads from her favorite verse. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." And they cry, not out of weakness, but remembrance. Sean Grayson entered the Illinois Department of Corrections in early February 2025. He was assigned to a medium security facility in Joliet. No special treatment, no isolation. He served time alongside men he once might have arrested. Inside, he kept to himself. Read books. "I worked in the laundry room." Inmates said he rarely spoke, except once, when someone asked if he regretted what happened. He said quietly, "Every day." Whether it was guilt, shame, or self-pity, no one could tell. Outside, the world had already moved on to the next headline. But for Sonya's family, time hadn't healed anything. By spring 2025, documentaries and podcasts had picked up the story. Netflix approached the family about adapting the case into a limited series. Major networks aired retrospectives on faith and fear in law enforcement. Sonya's name became part of the larger conversation, alongside Breonna Taylor, Atashiana Jefferson, and Sandra Bland. Her photo appeared at rallies across the country. But for her family, it wasn't about fame. It was about remembering her as more than a victim. "She loved to sing," her cousin said in one interview. "She baked pies for everyone on Sundays. She believed the world was good." Those are the details that never make headlines, the simple truths that make the loss unbearable. Experts called Sonya's killing a turning point case. For the first time in Illinois, an officer was convicted for shooting someone who called for help. It challenged the long-standing narrative that split-second fear justifies everything. But even as laws evolved, one truth remained: change is slow. Every year, dozens of similar cases still emerge across the U.S. Different names, same patterns, and each time, communities relive the same heartbreak. It's easy to focus on the courtroom drama, the verdict, the sentence, the protests. But at the core of this story is something painfully human: misunderstanding. A woman of faith saw danger and called for protection. An officer saw fear and mistook her faith for defiance. Two people, both afraid. But only one had the gun. It's hard not to wonder, if Grayson had paused just one more second, if he'd taken a breath, if he'd listened, would Sonya still be alive? That's the haunting question left behind. In the year following her death, Sonya's church held a memorial service titled Faith Over Fear. Hundreds attended, not just locals, but people from across the state. Her pastor spoke softly from the pulpit. Faith is what Sonya lived by. Fear is what took her life. We can't let fear win again. That message, simple but powerful, spread beyond Springfield. It became the slogan of community groups and youth programs dedicated to de-escalation, empathy, and racial harmony. Faith Over Fear banners still hang at city marches, and each one bears her name. Today, when people mention Sonya Massey, they often start with how she died. But maybe what matters more is how she lived. She believed in people. She believed in kindness. She believed that calling for help would bring safety, not death. That belief cost her life. But it also changed lives after her. Because now, every recruit, every dispatcher, every trainee in Illinois hears her story. They study her case not as a scandal, but as a warning of how quickly fear can override training, and how faith can be misread as threat. The last time Sonya's mother spoke to the press, she said something that silenced the room. I don't want people to just remember how she died. I want them to live how she lived, with faith. And maybe that's what this story truly is, not just a tragedy, but a test. A test of what we value more: fear or faith, instinct or understanding, justice or comfort. Because in that kitchen, on that quiet night in Springfield, fear pulled the trigger. Faith was the last thing standing. And it died with her. They say justice was served. But justice without change is just a headline waiting to happen again. Sonya called 911 because she believed in help. She believed in the system, in the badge, in the oath, in the promise that someone would come to protect her. Instead, that promise killed her. Her name shouldn't fade into another statistic, another viral clip, another hashtag. Because Sonya Massey was more than that. She was a daughter, a believer, a woman who deserved to live. And if her story made you stop for even a second, if it made you think, feel, or question, then don't let it end here. Share her story. Talk about it. Because the only thing louder than fear should be truth.